The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it, raw and animal, as iron-hard hands dragged her across broken stone into a room drenched in candlelight and shadow. Mirabel Abbott had no idea where she was. One moment she'd been crouched in the basement of the abandoned factory with the children pressed against her sides, their breathing shallow with terror, and the next something had exploded through the walls above them. Not something. Someone. People who moved too fast to be human, their eyes catching the dim light like cats, their pale faces beautiful and terrible all at once. They'd torn through the smugglers who'd been using the upper floors, and the sounds that followed made her blood turn to ice. Then they'd found her. She'd tried to explain, tried to tell them she wasn't with the smugglers, but they hadn't listened. They'd simply seized her arms and hauled her up through the wreckage, leaving the 4 children huddled in their hiding place. She'd fought then, wild with panic, thinking only of getting back to them, but whoever these people were, they possessed strength beyond anything natural. Now she stood in what might have once been an office, the desk shoved aside, and the room transformed into something that looked like a medieval court transplanted into industrial ruin. The figure seated in the high-backed chair made her forget how to breathe. He was white as marble, white-haired and impossibly beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly. His features were sharp and perfect, his bearing so regal and commanding that she understood instantly what he was even before she registered the unnatural stillness of his chest, the predatory focus in eyes that gleamed crimson in the candlelight. A vampire. Not just any vampire, she realized, taking in the way the others in the room stood at careful attention, the way they looked to him. Someone who ruled. He studied her with an expression that gave away nothing, and she felt her knees buckle. The hands holding her let go, and she crashed down onto the stone, pain shooting through her legs. She didn't care. Terror flooded every nerve. "Please," she gasped, the words spilling out before conscious thought. "Please, I wasn't with them. I was hiding from them. Please, you have to believe me." The Vampire King, because that's what he had to be, said nothing. His silence was worse than any threat. "The children," she choked out, tears burning her eyes now. "There are children in the basement, 4 of them, orphans. I was protecting them from the smugglers. They were going to sell them, or worse. Please, please, they're just children. They've done nothing wrong. I beg you, have mercy. Whatever you're going to do to me, fine, but let them go. Please." She was sobbing now, her forehead pressed to the filthy floor, her whole body shaking. She'd spent 3 weeks tracking rumors of children being taken, 3 weeks following leads that dead-ended or turned into nightmares. And when she'd finally found them tonight, hidden in a crate in that basement, she'd thought the hard part was over. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. The silence stretched until she thought she might shatter from it. Then he spoke, and his voice was like dark velvet over steel, ancient and absolute. "Look at me." She forced her head up, tears streaming down her face, and met his crimson gaze. Something flickered there, something she couldn't name. It was gone before she could grasp it. "Your name," he said quietly. "Mirabel Abbott." Her voice cracked. "Please, the children. They're so scared." Another silence, shorter this time. Then he stood in a single fluid motion that made her flinch and spoke to someone behind her. "Retrieve the children she speaks of. Bring them here unharmed." Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed completely. 2 of the pale figures disappeared faster than her eyes could track. The Vampire King stepped down from the dais where his chair stood and approached her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go, and besides, her legs had turned to water. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her with that unreadable expression. "You were not part of Victor's operation," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "No, I work at a community center in the city. We help homeless kids, runaways. We started hearing rumors about children disappearing. No one else was looking for them, so I did." She wiped at her face with a shaking hand. "I found them tonight. I was trying to figure out how to get them out when your people came. You came here alone. Yes. That was extraordinarily foolish." She almost laughed, a broken sound. "I know, but no one else was going to help them, so it had to be me." Something else moved behind his eyes, quick as lightning. Then the 2 vampires returned, and with them came the children. Mirabel's heart lurched. There was Elena, only 7 years old, her dark hair tangled and her dress torn. Marcus, 10, trying so hard to be brave. The twins, Sophia and Samuel, barely 6, clinging to each other. They looked terrified but unhurt, and when they saw Mirabel they cried out and tried to run to her. The vampires holding them looked to their king uncertainly. "Release them," he said softly. The children bolted to Mirabel, and she gathered them close, ignoring the pain in her knees, pressing her face into their hair and breathing them in. They were real. They were safe. Thank God, thank every God, they were safe. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's okay now. I've got you." She looked up at the vampire king through her tears, hardly believing what had just happened. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you." He regarded her for a long moment, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not quite warmth, but not coldness either. Something complicated and old and almost painful. "You will come with me," he said finally. "All of you. It's not safe here, and you have nowhere else to go." It was true, she realized. She'd used the last of her savings to track the children down, and the safe house she'd been planning to bring them to had been compromised last week. She'd been operating on hope and desperation, no real plan beyond finding them. "Where?" she asked warily. "Somewhere the human authorities cannot find them and ask uncomfortable questions," he said. "Somewhere they will be fed and clothed and protected. You have my word." She studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. What she found instead was sincerity, and stranger still, something that looked almost like respect. It made no sense. He was a vampire king, and she was nobody. A human woman who worked minimum wage at a community center and spent her nights searching for lost children. "Why would you help us?" she asked. The question seemed to strike him in a way she didn't understand. His expression shuddered, but not before she caught a glimpse of something raw beneath. "Because you asked for mercy," he said quietly, and meant it. The night air was cold against her face as they emerged from the ruined factory. Mirabel carried Sophia while Marcus held Samuel's hand, and Elena pressed close to her other side. The vampire king had sent most of his people away to deal with the aftermath, whatever that meant, but a handful remained, including a tall woman with ice-white hair who looked at the children with something almost like curiosity. A vehicle waited in the shadows, sleek and black and far too expensive for this neighborhood. The vampire king opened the door himself and waited while Mirabel helped the children inside. The interior was warm and soft, luxury beyond anything she'd ever experienced. The children huddled together on one seat while she took the one opposite, and to her surprise, the king slid in beside her rather than taking the front passenger seat. The door closed with a quiet click, and they were moving, gliding through the dark streets like a shadow given wheels. Mirabel kept one hand on Elena's knee, tethering herself to the children, to something real and human. Her heart was still racing, and she wasn't sure it would ever slow down again. She snuck a glance at the vampire beside her and found him watching the city pass by the window, his profile sharp enough to cut. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, surprising herself. He turned to look at her, and she saw the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement. Marius Ravencrest. A vampire name. Old world and powerful. It suited him. "How long have you been—" She gestured vaguely, not quite knowing how to phrase it. "Alive?" His mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "Nearly 800 years. The number was incomprehensible. 8 centuries. The world he'd been born into would have been unrecognizable to her. "That's a long time." "It is." "Are you really a king?" "I am." He said it simply, without arrogance or pride, just stating fact. "The vampire courts in this region answer to me, have done for 300 years. She absorbed that, trying to wrap her mind around it. "And the smugglers? Were they human?" "No. Vampires who thought themselves above the law." His voice went cold. "They were mistaken." She thought about the sounds she'd heard from the basement, the screams that had cut off abruptly. "Did you kill them?" "Yes." She waited for horror to come, for disgust, but all she felt was a grim satisfaction. The smugglers had planned to sell those children, or drain them, or worse. They'd deserved whatever they'd gotten. "Good," she said. That got his attention. He looked at her with something like surprise, studying her face. You're not disturbed. They were going to hurt children, she said flatly. I'm glad they're dead. Silence stretched between them, different from before, almost comfortable. You meant what you said, he murmured, so quiet she almost didn't hear. In that room, about mercy. Of course I did. Even for yourself? She blinked, not understanding. What? You begged mercy for the children first, he said. You offered yourself instead. You expected me to kill you. She hadn't thought about it consciously, but he was right. She'd been so focused on the children she hadn't cared what happened to her as long as they survived. They needed someone to speak for them. They couldn't speak for themselves. He was still watching her with that intense, unsettling focus. When I entered that room, I expected to find smugglers and their accomplices. I expected lies and bargaining and attempts to buy freedom. I did not expect you. I'm sorry I screamed at your people, she said wryly. I was scared. You had cause to be. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. 800 years I have walked this earth, Mirabel Abbott. In all that time I have heard many pleas for mercy. Most were empty, selfish. But yours... He shook his head slowly. Yours was real. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The car turned onto a broader street, leaving the industrial district behind for neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier. Soon, they were passing buildings she recognized from magazines, the kind of architecture that spoke of old money and older power. Where are we going? Elena asked sleepily, her head on Mirabel's shoulder. Somewhere safe, Mirabel told her, hoping desperately it was true. I promise you, Marius said, his voice gentle in a way that startled her. No harm will come to any of you under my protection. On my honor and my throne, you are safe. Elena studied him with the unsettling clarity children sometimes possessed. You're not human, she said. No. Are you a vampire? Yes. Are you going to eat us? Mirabel started to intervene, but Marius raised a hand slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both reassurance and command. He leaned forward slightly, bringing himself to Elena's level, and when he spoke, his voice was serious and respectful in a way Mirabel wouldn't have expected from a vampire king addressing a 7-year-old child. I am not, he said. I do not feed on children, nor on anyone unwilling. You and your friends are guests under my protection. That means you are safe. Do you understand? Elena considered this gravely, then nodded. Okay. Okay, he echoed, and sat back. The car slowed, then stopped. When the door opened, Mirabel saw they'd arrived at a building that looked like something from another century, all Gothic stonework and tall windows standing incongruously among the modern high-rises. A mansion, she realized, a vampire mansion hidden in plain sight in the heart of the city. Marius exited first, then offered his hand to help her out. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was cool against hers, his grip steady and careful, and she had the sudden certainty that he was being consciously gentle, aware of his own strength and her fragility. The children tumbled out behind her, staring wide-eyed at the building. Marcus whistled low. This is where you live? One of my residences, Marius said. Come, you must be hungry. He wasn't wrong. Mirabel's stomach was eating itself, and she couldn't remember the last time the children had been properly fed. They followed him through a door that opened at their approach, into an entrance hall that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors and mahogany paneling, and a staircase swept upward into shadows. A woman appeared from a side corridor, human by the warmth in her face and the visible rise and fall of her breathing. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed elegantly but practically, and her expression shifted to surprise, and then something softer when she saw the children. Vera, Marius said, these are my guests. They require food, clothing, and rooms prepared. The children will need beds suitable for their ages. Miss Abbott will need appropriate accommodation as well. Vera's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, nodding. Of course, my lord. Right away. She turned to Mirabel with a smile that seemed genuine. Come with me, dear. Let's get those little ones fed first, shall we? Mirabel glanced at Marius uncertainly. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of permission or perhaps reassurance. You're safe here, he said again. Rest. We will talk more tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening. Because he was vampire and would sleep through the daylight hours. She nodded slowly, still half convinced this was some kind of elaborate dream or trick, and followed Vera down a corridor with the children trailing behind her like ducklings. The kitchen was enormous and gleaming, all stainless steel and dark wood, and within minutes Vera had produced bread and cheese and soup that smelled like heaven. The children fell on it with single-minded intensity, while Mirabel forced herself to eat more slowly, her mind spinning. Vera asked no questions, just kept the food coming and found juice boxes for the children and hot tea for Mirabel. When everyone had eaten their fill, she led them upstairs to a wing that had clearly been unused but was clean and comfortable. The children got a large room with 4 beds already made up in fresh linens, and Mirabel got a smaller room adjoining it with a door she could leave open to hear them if they called out. "The bathroom is through there," Vera said, pointing. "There are clothes in the wardrobes that should fit well enough for tonight. We'll arrange for proper things tomorrow. Is there anything else you need right now?" Mirabel shook her head mutely, overwhelmed. Vera's expression softened. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Better than most. You made an impression tonight, I think. He doesn't bring people here lightly." Then she was gone, closing the door softly behind her, and Mirabel was alone with her thoughts for the first time since the raid. She checked on the children, found them already half asleep in their beds, exhausted beyond words. Marcus was trying to stay alert, keeping watch, and she sat beside him and stroked his hair until he finally relaxed and drifted off. Only then did she return to her own room and close the door. The bed was enormous and ridiculously comfortable. There were indeed clothes in the wardrobe, beautiful things in fabrics she couldn't name. She found a nightgown and changed, then stood at the window looking out over the city lights and trying to process what had happened. She'd found the children. That was the important thing. They were safe, fed, warm. Everything else was secondary. But everything else was also deeply strange. A vampire king had shown her mercy when he could have killed her without thought. More than mercy, he'd brought them to his home, promised protection, looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. She didn't understand it, didn't understand him. She thought about his face when she'd begged for the children, the way something had shifted behind his eyes. Pain, she thought now. She'd seen pain, old and deep and carefully hidden, but there nonetheless. What could make a vampire king carry pain for centuries? She climbed into bed with that question circling her thoughts and fell asleep almost immediately, her body shutting down from pure exhaustion. Her dreams were fragmented and strange, full of crimson eyes and voices begging for mercy in languages she didn't know. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the curtains, and she could hear the children's voices through the adjoining door, excited and wondering. She found them already dressed in clothes that fit better than anything they'd worn in months, exploring their room and chattering about the enormous house. Vera appeared with breakfast on a rolling cart, enough food to feed an army. "Eat up," she said cheerfully. "Growing children need their strength, and you too, Miss Abbott. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." She wasn't wrong. Mirabel ate until she was pleasantly full, watching the children laugh and play in a way they hadn't been able to in far too long. It felt surreal, like they'd stumbled into a fairy tale, a dark fairy tale, perhaps, but one where the monster had turned out to be kind. "Where is he?" she asked Vera as the woman collected the empty dishes. "Marius, I mean." "Resting," Vera said. "He'll wake at sunset. That gives you the day to yourselves. I thought perhaps the children might like to explore the gardens if you're comfortable with that. They're walled and private. No one can see in." "That sounds wonderful," Mirabel said honestly. The gardens were extraordinary, a hidden oasis of green in the middle of the city. There were paths winding between flower beds, a small pond with actual fish, and a lawn soft enough for the children to run barefoot. They played for hours while Mirabel sat on a stone bench and let the sunshine warm her face, feeling the tight knot of fear in her chest slowly begin to unravel. They were safe. Impossibly, against all odds, they were safe. As afternoon shadows lengthened, she herded the children back inside. Vera had prepared another meal, and after they had eaten, she suggested the children might like to watch a movie in what she called the entertainment room. Mirabel agreed, grateful for the normalcy, and found herself sitting on an enormous sofa with the 4 of them piled around her, watching an animated film about talking animals. She must have dozed off because she woke to find twilight purpling the windows and a presence in the room that hadn't been there before. Marius stood near the doorway, watching the movie with an expression of faint bemusement. He looked exactly as he had the night before, flawlessly composed and regal in dark clothing that might have been modern or might have been centuries old. The children hadn't noticed him yet, too absorbed in the movie. Mirabel carefully extracted herself and crossed to where he stood. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this, for them. I don't know how to repay you." "I require no repayment," he said, his gaze still on the children. "They are well? They're wonderful. This place is wonderful. I still don't quite understand why you're doing it." Now he looked at her, and she saw that complicated expression again, the one that spoke of thoughts and memories she couldn't begin to guess at. "Walk with me," he said. "There are things we should discuss." Her heart jumped, but she nodded, checking that the children were content before following him out of the room and down a corridor. He led her to a library that took her breath away, floor-to-ceiling books on every wall, with rolling ladders and soft lighting, and the kind of profound quiet that only came from thousands of volumes absorbing sound. He gestured to a pair of leather chairs near a fireplace, and she sat, watching as he remained standing, gazing into the unlit hearth. "Oh, I told you I have lived 800 years, he said finally. "In that time I have done much that I am proud of. I have built kingdoms, created laws, protected the innocent. But I have also done things I am not proud of, things that haunt me still." She said nothing, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. 3 centuries ago, he continued, his voice low and distant, I was hunting a criminal, a vampire who had broken our most sacred laws. I tracked him across half the continent and finally cornered him in a village. He had taken refuge in a church. When I arrived, he came out to face me, and he had a child with him. A girl, perhaps 9 years old. Mirabel's breath caught. He claimed he had saved her from a burning building, that he had harmed no one in the village, that he'd only stolen gold to survive and would face justice if I let the child go free. He begged for mercy. For her, not for himself. He said she had family who needed her. Marius's hands clenched at his sides. I did not believe him. I thought it was a trick, a manipulation. Vampires do not save human children, so I killed him where he stood. And the child ran. He stopped, and she could see the muscle in his jaw working. Later I learned the truth from the villagers. The child's mother had died in the fire. The vampire had indeed saved the girl. The gold he'd stolen had been to buy passage for her to relatives in another city. He was guilty of theft, yes, but not the murders I'd accused him of. And I had executed him without trial, without mercy, because I could not conceive that one of our kind might act selflessly. He finally turned to face her. The child died 2 days later. Complications from the smoke she'd breathed. She died alone because I killed the only one who had tried to help her. Mirabel's eyes burned with tears. "That's terrible," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "It was my choice and my fault," he said flatly. "I have carried the weight of it ever since. I swore then that I would never again refuse mercy to one who truly deserved it. But in 800 years, Mirabel, in all the centuries since that day, no one has ever begged me for mercy the way that man did. No one has offered themselves to spare another. Not until you." She understood then, the look in his eyes when she'd knelt on that factory floor. She'd reopened a wound he'd been nursing for 300 years. "You're not that person anymore," she said firmly. "The one who made that choice. You can't be, or you wouldn't have spent 3 centuries regretting it." "Can't I?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I am vampire Mirabel. We do not change. We are what we are, forever frozen in the moment of our transformation." "I don't believe that," she said. "You changed the moment you felt regret. You changed when you swore to do better. Change isn't about being different, it's about choosing different." She stood, crossing to stand before him. "You chose mercy last night. You chose kindness. That's who you are now." He looked at her with something like wonder, as though she'd said something revolutionary. "You see the world very simply. Maybe that's not a bad thing." The silence that fell between them felt charged somehow, electric. She was suddenly very aware of how close they stood, of how he towered over her, of the inhuman beauty of his face. There was danger here, she knew. Vampires were predators no matter how civil they seemed. But she didn't feel afraid. She felt safe in a way that defied all logic. "The children cannot stay here indefinitely," he said finally, changing the subject. "Eventually, someone will look for them. Police, social workers, questions will be asked." Her heart sank. He was right. "I know. I just don't know what to do about it. The system failed them. That's how they ended up on the streets in the first place." "What if there was another way?" he asked slowly. "A permanent sanctuary. A place for children like them, protected and hidden, where they could grow up safe from those who would harm them." She stared at him. I mean a home," he said. "A real one, with staff and resources and all the protection my name and power can provide. It would have to be carefully managed, carefully hidden, but it could be done. If you were willing to run it." "Me?" Her voice came out as a squeak. "You found them when no one else bothered to look," he said simply. "You risked your life to protect them. They trust you. And I—" He paused, seeming to consider his words. "I trust you. I can provide the resources and protection, but it needs someone with a human heart to run it, someone who understands what these children need." Her mind reeled. A sanctuary for lost children protected by a vampire king. It sounded insane. It also sounded like the answer to every prayer she'd whispered in the dark over the last year, watching kids slip through the cracks of a broken system. "It would take time to arrange," he continued. "Months, perhaps. Paperwork, legal structures, finding the right property. But it could be done. In the meantime, you and the children would stay here under my protection." "Why?" she asked helplessly. "Why would you do this? It's not just mercy, it's everything. Your home, your resources, your protection. Why?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her face. His fingers were cool against her cheek, but infinitely careful, and she found herself leaning into the touch without meaning to. "Because you reminded me what mercy looks like," he said softly. "Because you are brave and fierce and good, and the world has precious little of any of those things. Because when I look at you, I remember why I swore to be better 3 centuries ago." He withdrew his hand. "And perhaps because I am selfish, and I wish to keep you near." Her breath caught. There was no mistaking the meaning in those last words, or the way he looked at her now. Want, longing, things she'd never expected to see in the eyes of a vampire king. "I barely know you," she whispered. "I know, and I have no right to feel as I do, but I find myself unable to help it." He stepped back, giving her space. "You need not answer now, about any of it. Stay here, let yourself and the children recover, and we will speak more of the sanctuary. The rest," he gestured vaguely. "The rest can wait until you are ready, if you ever are." She nodded mutely, her head spinning. A sanctuary, a purpose, and something else, something that made her pulse race and her skin flush. This was madness. He was a vampire, ancient and powerful and completely outside anything she'd ever known. But he was also kind and honorable, and when he looked at her she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before. "I'll think about it," she managed. "The sanctuary, I mean. That's an incredible offer. I need to think." "Of course." He inclined his head. "I must attend to business tonight. There are matters from the raid that require my attention. Vera will care for you and the children. If you need anything, tell her, and it will be provided." He turned to leave, but she caught his arm without thinking. He froze at her touch, looking down at where her fingers wrapped around his sleeve. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "Truly. For everything. You've given us a chance when we had none. That means more than I can say." His expression softened into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are very welcome, Mirabel Abbott." Then he was gone, moving with that unnatural speed, and she was alone in the library with her racing thoughts. The days that followed fell into a strange but comfortable rhythm. Mirabel and the children had the run of the house during daylight hours, and Marius joined them in the evenings. At first his presence made the children nervous, but he was unfailingly patient and gentle with them, treating their questions with seriousness and their fears with respect. Within a week, Elena was chattering to him about her drawings, and the twins had started leaving him little gifts, rocks and flowers from the garden arranged carefully on the table in the library where he worked. Mirabel watched this with amazement, seeing facets of him she'd never expected. He taught Marcus chess and never once let him win, but praised the boy's improving strategy with genuine pleasure. He sat through Elena's interminable stories about her imaginary friends without complaint. He remembered that Samuel didn't like carrots and that Sophia was afraid of the dark, and adjusted accordingly without being asked. She found herself spending more time with him after the children went to bed, sitting in the library or on the terrace under the stars, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the world he'd seen, the centuries he'd lived through, and she told him about her life, ordinary and small by comparison, but no less real. He listened as though every word mattered, asked questions that showed he genuinely cared about her answers. She learned that he'd been a minor lord's son when he was turned, that he'd been ambushed by a vampire who'd left him for dead rather than properly initiating him into the blood, that he'd spent his first century wild and half-mad before an older vampire had found him and taught him control, that he'd built his kingdom carefully over centuries, creating laws and structures to protect both vampires and humans from each other's worst impulses. "The humans don't know you exist," she said one night, confused. "How can you protect them?" "By ensuring our kind does not prey on them indiscriminately," he said, "by punishing those who kill for sport or carelessness, by maintaining order among vampires so that we remain hidden rather than exposed. If humans knew of us, there would be war, and no one would benefit from that." It made a brutal kind of sense. Somewhere in those evenings, somewhere between chess lessons and starlight conversations, she felt the ground shifting under her feet. She was falling for him, she realized with a jolt one night as she watched him laugh at something Elena had said. Actually falling, despite every logical reason not to. He was kind and intelligent and patient. He listened to her in a way no one ever had. He looked at her like she was precious, like her presence in his home mattered beyond the sanctuary project. And he'd made no move to push her, she realized. He'd spoken of wanting her near, but since that night, he'd never mentioned it again, never pressed, just let her exist in his space and his life without demands or expectations. It was impossibly attractive. The sanctuary plans moved forward. Marius had people, vampires, and trusted humans both, who handled the logistics. They found a property outside the city, an old estate with extensive grounds that could be secured and renovated. Lawyers drew up paperwork creating a legal nonprofit with Mirabel as director. Contractors began work. Money flowed like water, and Mirabel stopped asking about costs. After the third time, Marius waved off her concerns. 6 weeks after the night they'd met, she stood in the library watching the sunset paint the sky crimson and realized she was happy. The children were thriving. The sanctuary was becoming real. And she was here, in this impossible place with this impossible man, and somehow it all felt right. She heard him enter behind her, recognized his footsteps. She'd learned to distinguish his presence from others, some sixth sense that tingled along her spine whenever he was near. "The contractors say another 6 weeks before the sanctuary is ready," he said, coming to stand beside her at the window. "They are making excellent progress." "Thanks to your money and your people scaring them into working fast," she said with a slight smile. "Perhaps?" He was quiet for a moment. "When it is ready, you will move there with the children." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. That was always the plan. "It is 20 minutes from here by car," he continued. "I could visit, if you wished me to." She turned to look at him fully. In the dying light, his white hair seemed to glow, and his eyes were darker crimson, almost burgundy, beautiful and inhuman and devastating. "I would wish you to," she said quietly. "Very much." Something blazed in his expression, hope and want and careful restraint all at once. "Mirabel." "I know what you are," she said before he could continue. "I know what you're capable of, the things you've done, the centuries you carry, but I also know who you've been these last weeks, who you've chosen to be. And she took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. I know that's foolish and dangerous and probably doomed, but it's true." He closed the distance between them in an instant, his hands coming up to frame her face, and she saw that he was shaking very slightly. "It is not foolish," he said roughly, "and if it is doomed, it is only because I am terrified I will fail you somehow, fail to be what you deserve. But I have loved you since the moment you begged for those children's lives. I have loved you through every day since, and I will love you for whatever time you allow me, mortal or otherwise." Then he was kissing her and she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. His mouth was cool and careful and perfect, and when he pulled back, they were both breathing hard despite the fact he didn't actually need to breathe. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice unsteady. "Before this goes further, I'm not strong or special. I'm human, and I'm fragile, and I'm going to age while you stay exactly as you are. Someday I'll be old and you'll still be this, and I don't know how that works. I don't know if it can work." "I know," he said seriously. "I have thought of little else, and I will not lie to you, it will be difficult. But I would rather have you for your mortal lifetime than not have you at all. If you will have me, I will treasure every moment we are given, and when the time comes that you leave this world, I will carry you in my heart for whatever centuries remain to me." Tears pricked her eyes. "That's the saddest, most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." "It is truth." He kissed her forehead gently. "I will not ask you to turn. That choice is yours and yours alone, and I will love you regardless of what you choose. Do you understand?" She nodded. Overwhelmed. "I don't want to turn," she said quietly. "Not now. Maybe not ever. Humanity matters to me. Living this life fully matters." "Then you shall remain human," he said simply, "and I will stand beside you for as long as you walk this earth." She kissed him again, pouring everything she felt into it, and when they finally broke apart, they were both smiling like fools. A month later, chaos shattered their peace. It started with Sophia waking screaming from a nightmare, thrashing so violently that Mirabel and Marius both came running. The little girl was inconsolable, sobbing about the bad man and blood and he'll find us. It took an hour to calm her down, and even then, she clung to Mirabel with desperate strength. "What did you see, little one?" Marius asked gently, crouched beside the bed. "The man from the bad place," Sophia whispered. "Before the factory, he was angry. He hurt someone." Mirabel felt ice slide down her spine. "What place, sweetheart? Before we found you?" Slowly, haltingly, the story emerged. Before the smugglers had taken them, the children had been held in another location briefly. A house somewhere fancy, Sophia thought, and one night she'd gotten lost looking for the bathroom and seen through a doorway a man in expensive clothes standing over another man who wasn't moving. There had been blood everywhere. "She witnessed a murder," Mirabel said quietly to Marius. "She saw something she shouldn't have." His expression had gone cold and dangerous. "Describe the man who was angry," he said to Sophia. Her description was childish but detailed enough. Very pale, white-haired, wearing a ring with a red stone. A vampire, clearly, and from the way Marius's jaw tightened, one he might know. He stood abruptly. "Stay here. Lock the door. I must make calls." He was gone for 2 hours, and when he returned, his expression was grim. The dead man Sophia saw was named Dmitry Volkov. He was a vampire, a merchant who dealt in information. He went missing 6 weeks ago, the same time the children disappeared. "You think someone killed him because of something he knew," Mirabel said. "I think someone killed him and then trafficked the children because they witnessed it," Marius corrected. "The smugglers you found them with were bottom feeders, easily paid off, but they would have been working for someone. Can you find out who?" His hesitation told her everything. "There are 3 vampire lords in this city who wear rings with red stones. One is a close ally. The other 2, he shook his head. Ambitious men who have long thought I hold too much power. If it is either of them, this becomes complicated." "How complicated?" "Accusations without proof could mean civil war among the courts," he said flatly. "Proof of a lord trafficking children and murdering other vampires, on the other hand, would demand justice. So we need proof. We need Sophia to identify him, which means making her visible to the courts, putting her in danger." He slammed his hand against the wall, hard enough to crack the plaster. "This is exactly what I feared. She should be safe here, but instead, she's a target." Mirabel felt sick, but forced herself to think clearly. She saw something in the nightmare. "Can you protect her if she has to testify?" "I can try. But if a vampire lord is willing to kill one of our own and traffic children to hide it, he will stop at nothing to silence her." He turned back to her and she saw fear in his eyes, maybe for the first time since they'd met. I cannot lose you, any of you. I would burn my kingdom to ash before I let harm come to these children or to you." "Then we fight," she said firmly. "We get the proof, we protect Sophia, and we end this. That's what the sanctuary is supposed to be, a place where kids are safe from monsters, so let's make sure she is." He stared at her, then pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "You are braver than any warrior I have known," he murmured against her hair, "and I am terrified." "So am I," she admitted. "But we're not alone." Over the next few days, Marius worked tirelessly. He called in every favor, spoke to every contact, and slowly assembled a picture. The vampire wearing the ring who'd been seen near Dmitry Volkov's last known location was named Casimir Drakos, a lord who controlled the Western territories. He was wealthy, powerful, and had been quietly consolidating power for years. Dmitry Volkov had worked for him as an accountant and information broker. "He found something," Marius said grimly, spreading papers across the library desk. "I cannot prove it yet, but I believe Dmitry discovered Casimir was embezzling from the collective courts. The treasury we all contribute to for mutual defense and resources. If true, it is a capital crime. So Casimir killed him to keep him quiet, and trafficked the children because Sophia saw it happen," Mirabel said. "Can you bring charges?" "Not without proof of the embezzlement and a witness to the murder. I have forensic accountants looking through the records, but they are incomplete. Casimir has been careful, which means the only proof is Sophia's testimony. Then she testifies. If I call her before the court, Casimir will know immediately what she represents," Marius said. "He will try to kill her before she can speak, or kill you to force my hand. I cannot allow that." Mirabel understood the impossible position they were in. They needed Sophia's testimony, but protecting her seemed impossible unless— "What if we make it public?" she said slowly. "Not the vampire courts, human authorities. If everyone knows what she saw, killing her becomes pointless. The secret's already out." Marius shook his head. "Human authorities cannot touch Casimir, and exposing our world to them would bring consequences neither of us can control." "But what if we use the threat of it? If Casimir thinks we're about to go public with everything, the murder, the trafficking, all of it, maybe that forces him into the open." "It also makes you a target," Marius said flatly. "Absolutely not." "You're already protecting me," she argued, "and the children. What difference does it make if the threat is implicit or explicit? The difference is you become the focal point of his rage rather than one possible target among many. Mirabel, please. I cannot bear the thought of you in danger." She took his hands, holding them tight. "We can't hide forever, and those kids deserve justice, deserve to be safe. If there's a way to end this, we have to try." They argued for hours, but eventually she wore him down. The plan they devised was dangerous but elegant. Marius would call a formal convocation of the vampire courts, ostensibly to discuss the aftermath of the smuggling ring. At that gathering, he would announce that new evidence had emerged regarding Dmitry Volkov's death and that a child witness was prepared to testify. He would also announce that full documentation of the case had been prepared and lodged with human authorities to be opened in the event of any harm coming to those involved. It was a bluff they hadn't actually done that, but Casimir wouldn't know that. And the public nature of the announcement would make silencing Sophia much more difficult. "He will come after you regardless," Marius said grimly the night before the convocation. "You and the children both. He cannot afford to let this stand." "Then we make sure he can't reach us," she said. She'd sent Elena and Marcus and Samuel to a safe house outside the city, protected by vampires Marius trusted absolutely. Sophia remained because her testimony was the key, but she would be surrounded by guards every moment, and Mirabel refused to hide, insisting she needed to stand with Marius as they saw this through. The convocation took place in a building Mirabel had never seen before, a cathedral-like space beneath the city streets that looked like it had stood since medieval times. Vampires filled the pews, hundreds of them, all pale and perfect and utterly inhuman. She stood beside Marius at the front, very conscious of being the only living human in the room, and tried not to think about how many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Marius addressed the assembly in a voice that rang with authority, explaining the raid on the smuggling ring and the children recovered. Then he spoke of Dmitry Volkov's murder and the evidence they'd gathered. Finally, he looked directly at where Casimir Drakos sat, resplendent in dark velvet, his expression carefully neutral. "A child witness has come forward," Marius said clearly. "She will identify the vampire she saw standing over Dmitry Volkov's body. In addition, we have evidence of significant financial irregularities that may be connected to this case. All documentation has been secured with human authorities as insurance. Any attempt to harm the witness or those protecting her will result in full exposure of our world to human law enforcement. I trust I make myself clear." The silence that followed was electric. Casimir stood slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was smooth and unconcerned. "These are serious accusations, Marius. I hope you have more than a child's nightmare to base them on." "I have enough to bring you before this court for judgment," Marius said coldly. "Will you consent to face the witness?" "Of course," Casimir said, spreading his hands. "I have nothing to hide. Let your witness speak, and we shall see what truth emerges." It was too easy, Mirabel thought, too smooth. He had something planned. Sophia was brought in, small and brave and terrified, holding Vera's hand. Marius had arranged for her to testify from behind a screen, so she wouldn't have to see the assembled vampires directly, but her voice carried clearly as she described what she'd seen. "The bad man was very angry," she said. "He was shouting at the man on the floor. And then he hurt him. There was so much blood. And then he saw me and I ran away." "Can you see that man in this room?" Marius asked gently. There was a long pause. Then Sophia said, "Yes, he's right there." She pointed directly at Casimir Drakos. The room erupted. Vampires were shouting, some in outrage at the accusation, others demanding answers. Casimir's expression had gone cold and furious, all pretense of innocence stripped away. Marius called for order, but the chaos had already taken hold. Then everything went wrong at once. The lights went out, plunging the chamber into darkness. Mirabel felt someone grab her arm and she screamed, fighting back instinctively. There were shouts and crashes all around, the sound of violence in the dark. Then light bloomed from Marius's hands, some kind of supernatural radiance, and she saw him facing off against Casimir with 3 other vampires between them. "Did you truly think it would be that simple?" Casimir snarled. "That I would let a human child destroy everything I've built? She dies tonight, and you with her for your arrogance." "You will have to go through me," Marius said, and his voice carried such command that even Casimir's allies hesitated. "Then I will," Casimir said, and moved. The fight was brutal and terrifyingly fast. Vampires moved in blurs, too quick for Mirabel's eyes to track properly. She saw Marius fighting with savage grace, holding off multiple attackers while trying to get to where Sophia stood frozen in terror. Other vampires had joined the battle, some defending Marius, others attacking. The entire chamber had descended into chaos. Mirabel ran for Sophia, grabbing the child and pulling her close. Vera appeared beside them, moving faster than a human should, and Mirabel realized with a start that she must be vampire too, glamored to appear human most of the time. Together, they fought their way toward an exit. They almost made it. They were 10 feet from the door when Casimir appeared in front of them, moving faster than thought, his hand closing around Sophia's arm. Mirabel screamed and fought, but he was impossibly strong, dragging the child away. "Let her go," Marius roared from across the chamber. He threw off his opponents with terrifying strength and started toward them, but more vampires blocked his path. Casimir smiled, cold and cruel. "You should have stayed out of this, Marius. Now you'll watch her die and know it was your arrogance that killed her." He raised his hand, nails extending into claws, and Mirabel saw her death in Sophia's terrified eyes. She did the only thing she could think of. She threw herself forward, putting her body between Casimir and the child. "Please," she gasped, echoing her plea from that first night. "Have mercy. She's just a child. Kill me instead, but let her live." Casimir laughed. "How touching, as you wish." His hand drove forward and agony tore through Mirabel's chest. She felt her ribs crack, felt something vital rupture inside, and the world tilted sideways. She hit the ground hard, unable to breathe, black spots crowding her vision. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Marius screaming her name. She woke to soft light and pain everywhere. Her chest felt like it was on fire, and breathing was agony. She tried to move, and a gentle hand pressed her shoulder back down. "Easy," Vera's voice said. "You're safe, but you need to rest." Mirabel forced her eyes to focus. She was back in the mansion, in her room, and sunlight streamed through the windows. Daytime then, which meant, "Marius?" she croaked. "Resting," Vera said. "He'll wake at sunset and he'll be desperate to see you. You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days. Sophia, the other children? All safe. Elena, Marcus, and Samuel are in the next room. Sophia is downstairs, a bit shaken, but physically unharmed. Vera's expression was grim. "You saved her life. Casimir's blow should have killed you instantly. It would have killed anyone human." "How am I alive?" Mirabel asked. Vera hesitated. "Marius, when you went down, he lost control. I've never seen him like that. He tore through Casimir's supporters like they were paper. Casimir himself fled, but not before Marius nearly killed him. Then he got to you and—" She shook her head. "He gave you his blood, just enough to heal the worst of the damage. You're still human, but you'll recover much faster now." Vampire blood. The story said it could heal, but the cost was supposed to be steep. "Will I—" "No, you won't turn, not from such a small amount. But you'll carry a trace of him in your veins now. It will fade over time." Mirabel absorbed this, not sure how she felt about it. Mostly she was just grateful to be alive. "What happened to Casimir?" "On the run," Vera said with satisfaction, "but the courts have turned against him. Between Sophia's testimony and the financial records Marius's people uncovered, his guilt is undeniable. He's been condemned to death in absentia. If he's found, he'll be executed." "So it's over?" "This part of it, yes." Vera stood. "Rest now. Marius will want to see you the moment he wakes, and you need your strength for that conversation." She left, and Mirabel lay back, exhausted and aching, but alive. She'd survived. They'd survived. That evening when the sun set, she heard the door slam open, and then Marius was there, his expression wild, dropping to his knees beside the bed. "You're awake," he breathed. "Thank gods you're awake." "I'm okay," she said, though her chest still hurt viciously. "We're all okay." He took her hand carefully, as though afraid she might break, and she saw his eyes were red-rimmed. Could vampires cry? Maybe they could. "I thought I'd lost you," he said hoarsely. "When I saw him strike you, when I saw you fall, I thought I would go mad. I nearly did. If Vera hadn't stopped me, I would have burned the entire city hunting him." "But you didn't," she said gently. "You saved me instead. You made the right choice." "I gave you my blood without permission," he said. "I'm sorry. I couldn't let you die, but I should have asked. Should have—" She pressed her fingers to his lips. "You saved my life. Don't apologize for that." He kissed her hand, her wrist, working his way up her arm with desperate gentleness. When he reached her face, he stopped, cupping her cheeks and looking at her like he was memorizing every detail. "I love you," he said, "beyond reason, beyond wisdom. I love you and I cannot lose you. I will not survive it." "You're not going to lose me," she promised. "I'm staying right here." He kissed her then, carefully because of her injuries, and she tasted salt and realized he was crying. They held each other as the night deepened around them, and Mirabel felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or certainty. This was where she belonged. The weeks that followed were focused on recovery and consolidation. Mirabel healed with preternatural speed thanks to Marius's blood, and within a month she was back on her feet. The sanctuary was completed, and they began the careful process of moving in. The children adjusted with remarkable resilience, thrilled to have a real home with grounds to explore and adults who cared for them. Other children began arriving, brought by social workers Marius had carefully cultivated or found by the network of eyes he'd established throughout the city. Lost kids, trafficked kids, abused kids, all of them found refuge in the sanctuary, where Mirabel and a growing staff of teachers and counselors helped them heal and grow. Marius was a constant presence, visiting nearly every evening, helping with security and funding, and sometimes just sitting with the children, teaching them chess or telling them carefully edited stories of history he'd witnessed firsthand. The kids adored him, and Mirabel fell more in love with him every time she saw him patiently explaining something to a confused 8-year-old or carrying a sleeping child up to bed. Casimir was eventually found trying to flee the continent, and was executed by the vampire courts for his crimes. The financial irregularities he'd created were corrected, and the courts reorganized with new oversight. Marius's position was stronger than ever, his actions during the crisis cementing his reputation as a just and powerful king. But it was in the quiet moments that Mirabel saw who he really was. Not the king, not the ancient vampire, but simply Marius. The man who loved her, who woke each evening and came to find her first thing, who listened to her talk about the children's progress and funding challenges and behavioral issues with the same attention he gave to vampire politics, who held her when the nightmares came, who kissed her in the moonlight, who made her feel precious and protected and loved. 3 months after they had opened the sanctuary, he asked her to marry him. They were in the garden, the children all asleep inside, standing under a sky full of stars. He didn't kneel. He'd explained once that vampire kings knelt to no one, that it would be a violation of something fundamental in him, but he took her hands and looked at her with such open vulnerability that her breath caught. "I know I cannot give you a normal life," he said quietly. "I know the world will never understand what we are to each other. But I love you, Mirabel. I want to spend whatever time we have together as your husband, if you'll have me. Not as king to subject, but as equal to equal. Will you marry me?" She said yes through happy tears, and he slid a ring onto her finger, a band of silver set with a stone that glowed faintly in the darkness. Later he explained it was enchanted, a vampire tradition tied to his life force so that as long as he existed, it would glow. A promise that he would always find his way back to her. They married in the sanctuary garden 6 weeks later, with the children as witnesses and a small handful of Marius's most trusted people in attendance. It was quiet and private and perfect, and when he kissed her as his wife, Mirabel felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The years that followed were full and rich. The sanctuary grew, expanding to house more children, and eventually adding educational programs and job training. Mirabel oversaw it all with fierce dedication, and Marius supported her in every way, his resources and protection ensuring the sanctuary remained safe and thriving. He never asked her to turn, and she never offered, content to live her human life fully. They both knew it couldn't last forever, that someday age would catch up with her, but they didn't dwell on it. Instead, they focused on the time they had, on the love they shared, on the difference they were making. Sophia grew up smart and strong, eventually becoming a social worker herself, dedicated to helping trafficked children. Elena became an artist, her paintings displayed in galleries across the city. Marcus went into law enforcement, and the twins became teachers. All of them stayed connected to the sanctuary, visiting often, bringing their own families when they had them. Mirabel watched them grow with profound satisfaction, knowing they'd been given the chance they deserved. And every evening, when the sun set and Marius came home to her, she counted herself blessed beyond measure. 20 years after the night they had met, she stood in the same spot in the garden where they had married, now with silver threading her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Marius looked exactly as he had that first night, perfect and unchanging, and sometimes that hurt. But mostly she was just grateful. "Do you regret it?" she asked him one evening. "That I'm aging and you're not?" He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I regret only that I cannot grow old alongside you, but I treasure every moment, every change. You are beautiful now, and you will be beautiful when your hair is pure white and your hands shake. You will be beautiful because you are you, and that has never changed." "I worry about after," she admitted. "When I'm gone, you'll be alone for so long." "I will carry you with me," he said simply, "every day of my remaining existence, and I will continue the work we started here, ensuring the sanctuary thrives in your memory. You have changed me, Mirabel, made me better. That will not end when you do." She kissed him, pouring love and gratitude and bittersweet acceptance into it. This was their reality, beautiful and painful and real. More years passed. 30 years. 40. Mirabel's hair went fully white, and her joints ached on cold mornings, but she was still fierce and capable, still running the sanctuary with the same dedication she'd always had. Marius never wavered, never faltered in his devotion. If anything, he became more tender with her as time passed, more careful, treasuring each day. On their 50th wedding anniversary, he organized a celebration at the sanctuary. All of their children came, some now with grandchildren of their own. The garden was full of life and laughter and love, and Mirabel stood in the center of it all, feeling overwhelmed with joy. Sophia, now in her 50s herself, found Mirabel as the sun set and pulled her aside. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "All our lives. I never thanked you properly for that." "You never needed to," Mirabel said, hugging her. "Seeing you thriving, seeing all of you happy and whole, that's thanks enough. I mean it, though. You put yourself between me and a monster without hesitation, and you gave us this place, this home. Everything I am, everything I've been able to do, it's because of you, because you saw children no one else cared about and decided we mattered." Mirabel was crying now, unable to help it. "You always mattered, all of you. You deserved someone to fight for you." They stood together watching the celebration, and Mirabel felt Marius come up behind her, his presence a familiar comfort. She leaned back against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, careful of her fragile human bones, and together they watched the fruits of their shared labor play out in front of them. That night, after everyone had left, they lay together in their room at the sanctuary. Mirabel's health had been declining, slowly, nothing dramatic, just the weight of years accumulating, and they both knew she had maybe a handful of years left. Neither spoke of it often, but the knowledge hung between them, bittersweet. "Thank you," she said quietly into the darkness. "For what?" "For giving me this life, this incredible, impossible life. I never imagined anything like this when I was young. I never imagined someone like you." He held her closer. "I am the one who should thank you. You taught me mercy, remember? You taught me that strength comes from compassion, that power means nothing without purpose. You gave me a reason to be better than I was." "We made each other better," she said. "That's how love works, I think. Then I'm grateful for every moment of it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Mirabel dreamed of children laughing in sunlight, of a garden full of life, of crimson eyes full of love. 5 years later, Mirabel Abbott passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Marius holding her hand. She was 87 years old and had spent more than half a century doing work that mattered, surrounded by love. Marius mourned her with the kind of profound grief only an immortal could experience, knowing he would carry it for centuries to come. But he didn't break. He honored her memory by continuing their work, expanding the sanctuary and its programs, ensuring every child who came through its doors received the love and protection Mirabel had fought so hard to provide. He never married again, never even considered it. She had been his heart and his home, and though she was gone, her presence remained in everything he did. The sanctuary thrived under his continued patronage, helping thousands of children over the years that followed. And every evening when the sun set, Marius would walk through the garden where they'd married and feel her with him still. Not a ghost, not a haunting, but a presence woven into the very fabric of who he'd become. She had changed him irrevocably, had taught him that mercy and strength could coexist, that love was worth the pain of loss. The ring on his finger still glowed softly, tied to his life force, a reminder of promises kept and love that transcended mortality. He wore it for centuries after, a vampire king who had given his heart to a human woman and never once regretted it. The sanctuary stood for generations, a testament to one woman's fierce compassion and one vampire's determination to be worthy of her. Children continued to find refuge there, to heal and grow, and eventually leave to make their own marks on the world. And each of them carried forward the legacy of Mirabel Abbott, who had taught them that everyone deserved someone to fight for them, that mercy was never weakness, and that love could bridge even the gap between mortal and immortal. Marius Ravencrest ruled his kingdom with wisdom and justice for centuries more, always remembering the night a human woman had begged him for mercy and changed everything. He kept her memory alive in stories told to the children who came after, in the policies he enacted to protect the vulnerable, in the way he conducted himself as a leader. She had given him purpose, and he had given her protection. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting. And though death had eventually parted them, the love they'd shared continued to ripple outward through all the lives they'd touched, through all the children they'd saved, through all the years that followed. It was, in the end, Exactly what she would have wanted. A life lived fully, a love given freely, and a legacy that mattered. Mercy and protection freely offered and gratefully received, echoing forward through time. In the sanctuary garden, flowers bloomed year after year under careful tending. And every evening when the sun set, a white-haired vampire king would stand among them and remember the woman who had taught him what it meant to truly live, even in immortality. Her memory was his treasure, his burden, his blessing, and he carried it forward with pride and love and endless gratitude. Their story became legend among vampires, whispered in the dark courts as a reminder that even immortals could be changed by love, that mercy was never wasted, that protection given freely was the most powerful magic of all. And in the human world, though few knew the truth, the sanctuary stood as proof that sometimes the most unlikely people could come together to create something extraordinary. Mirabel Abbott had begged a vampire king for mercy, and he had given her his heart and his endless protection. In return, she had given him purpose and love, and the chance to be better than he'd been. It was a fair trade, they both would have said. More than fair, it was everything.